Well, welcome to Speaking of Horses. I'm your host, Wayne Williams, and we're ready to go right here with some of the great stories from the horse industry. So join us as we get ready to go Speaking of Horses right here on this station. Well, hey, welcome. Speaking of Horses right here on this station. You know, we were recently in Sedona, Arizona. It was one of the tour stops for the Equus Film Festival. Now, the Equus Film Festival moves all around the United States at different tour stops and culminates in their major stop, the big one, so to speak, which is in Manhattan in November every year. And it's quite a gathering of horse films and horse-related films. Right now, we want to talk about an interview we had with one of the filmmakers in Sedona. And let's listen to that interview right now.
So I'm Mathew Gary, and my film is Horse Packer, and we're here in Sedona, and my film is about a horsepacker in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it was actually his first year as the lead packer, taking over this large operation in Rocky Mountain, and we filmed. And it's actually been 3 years since we filmed this project, and when we did it, it was a surreal experience because, for one, the place we filmed was somewhat remote, and we got to have this story that was kind of told without bystanders, because we're actually filming in a national park, and it was so awesome to not have a bunch of people just poking their heads in, and we got to tell a real personal story between this man and him, you know, taking the reins, so to speak, as the new leader of this job, and that he had been an assistant for years. And this story got to be a lot more personal, and I also think that my main goal with this film was to preserve this job. I think that so many people hear of horse packing and don't really know what it is. Whenever I bring it up, unless you're really in the horse world, you don't know what horse packing is, and people have all their thoughts of what it is. But I know that the subject of my film was nervous about his job being replaced by helicopters, and you know, at some point, and I totally get it. It's a fear. It's because this job is hundreds of years old, and you know, I think. I felt it was my job to preserve it.
But there's areas in this country, and the Rocky Mountain areas that you were in, along with some areas in Idaho, which are almost, in some parts of Idaho, still almost uncharted.
Right,
okay?
Right.
You're never going, even if you can see where you want to go, you're never going to get a helicopter there because of the terrain, because of, say, updrafts with the air coming out of canyons or valleys. You're not going to get there. The only way to get there is on a horse or a mule, and if you're going in with supplies, you got to pack them in, and to work those mountains, you have to know what you're doing to do it.
Right.
And that's what your film is about.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also about, you know, it is dangerous, and I think that you do better. You know, you better know what you're doing.
There are areas right now, people don't think about this. We have a group outside Fort Bragg in North Carolina who are training for this, for packing and for, you know, remote riding, because we are still running several horses in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, in the fighting we're doing there now, because there are areas in those mountains you will not get to any other way if you have to physically get there. So we do technically still have a handful of cavalry horses in the Army.
Wow. Oh, and I know there was that film that came out about the whole story. There's a big Hollywood film that recently came out about the film where it was about Iraq or something, and it was the story about the men on the horses that were fighting.
Yeah, right. There was a, yes, I do.
Yes, that was a crazy story.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
I didn't even know about that story.
Yeah.
So no, that's absolutely. That's
so what inspired you to do this film? What was your inspiration?
My inspiration for this film was mainly because of our subject. His passion inspired me, and I, as a kid, I rode horses, you know, here and there as a kid, but I never was truly like subjected to, you know, somebody that's that passionate about what they do. And, you know, it's hard to not want to go film in Rocky Mountain National Park. And,
That's true.
You know, it's so easy. It was an easy sell for me. And I knew that it was a story that was, that wasn't told. And I think that I wanted to bring that story to life, that people don't hear about it, people don't know about it.
Right.
And that really stuck with me, and I felt it was a story that was untold.
Oh, because there are ways you can pack these horses, and they can carry a lot of material if you pack them properly.
Right.
All right. If you don't, then you're actually going to hurt the animal.
Totally.
And so you've got to know what you're doing. It's sort of like if you rode horses, you get a new horse and you take your favorite saddle because you fit nicely in that saddle.
Yeah.
And you take it over and put it on that horse, but it may not fit the horse, and you start getting bad rides because the horse is not comfortable.
Definitely.
And you're like, I don't understand it. I've got my favorite saddle. Well, wait a minute. It has to fit the horse. Packing 200 pounds on a horse, not a problem.
Right.
Unless you pack it improperly. Okay.
If you don't have the sides balanced,
Yeah.
you know, and he showed it in my film about how sometimes you have to tie your knots, which it's so much knot tying. I mean, knot tying is everything.
Yeah, to keep load from moving.
Exactly.
Right.
And if you have to actually, if you have an emergency and you need to bail, you know, to be able to disconnect the horses. That's so important, because if they're running around and everything's still connected, it's just going to be so much more of a problem when you go and try and clean up.
Right.
After a fall, or a horse gets spooked by something. So no, that knot tying is, and balancing of your loads is so incredibly important, and if not done right, can lead to disaster. So.
Yep. And you're already knowing that when you're packing in, you're heading into rugged terrain, or you wouldn't be packing in.
Right. Exactly.
So it's already a given where you're going.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, it's sort of like going into Rocky Mountain National Park, and the beauty of that area is like, this is my first time in Sedona. I've been in Arizona, I haven't been to Sedona, and
Yep.
what a
Same
gorgeous area this is. You know, it is
Stunning.
tremendous. So how long have you been making films?
So I went to film school at the University of Texas in Austin, and I graduated in 2013. And so now I started a production company after I graduated, and this was the first film that I made. And so that was about a year and a half after I graduated from film school. And so now, since then, we've been doing a lot of commercial work, and we are now about to actually take my Horsepacker film and turn it into a larger project for National Geographic. And that is the next step in my career, and we're all super excited. The film that's playing here is a 15-minute version of the film, and I cut it into a 3-minute version of the film as well, and I submitted it to a competition in National Geographic, and we were one of the finalists for this competition. And after the whole thing, they wanted to expand it into a piece for their Wild TV network. And
Wow.
so it's super exciting.
Yeah.
And so now we're trying to put together the final pieces into deciding what exactly it is that we're expanding upon, and what parts of the story we didn't include in the first version, and how to improve on what we did in the first version as well. And so
Because that would fit very nicely with the format of going into the wild. This is
Absolutely.
another avenue of going into the wild, where you're really into the wild with no man-made, so to speak,
Right.
apparatus that would bother wildlife. Wildlife will come right to you.
yeah.
Okay, as I'm sure you experienced in
Oh,
the
yes.
film.
Yes. Oh yeah, no fear
This
when
is-
you're out there.
Yeah, when you're out there like that, without the noises or the smells,
Right.
you know, of what man has made, you're out there totally with what nature has created, what God has made, and you're right in the middle of it, and it is amazing.
It is amazing, and I think that, like I said before, for us it was so lucky when we're out there and we're 5 miles into the woods, and you know we're still on a trail that is for the public, but nobody was out there. And so I really enjoyed not having, tourists scare away wildlife or get in the shot, and we got to really have this like man in nature and horse.
Or like some tourists who would try to pet the snakes. Or
yeah, something crazy.
They just didn't get the concept. Well, I'll tell you what, it's a very a wonderful project, because you can do backpacking so very well, and you can do it so very wrong.
Yes.
And the horse is the main brunt of both sides of it. They either enjoy it because the load itself is not that great on the horse as long as it's there properly.
Right.
And you're right, the knots, to be able to dump that load immediately if you have a problem. So there's so much to it.
There is, and I also think too, it's interesting that there are so many different ways to pack a horse, and all these different operations at different parks and different operations, they do it differently. And for my film, this tradition, how they did it at Rocky Mountain National Park, was from Navajo Indians, and that's what it was passed down from. And that was just their way. And one thing that I kind of wanted to expand on was going to some other parks and seeing how they do it differently, and having the host, the filmmaker from the subject from my film be the host, and actually go and have other horse packers teach him how they do it, in say Yellowstone or somewhere else. And because I think that's fascinating too, that it's not all the same way. And I think many people don't realize that or think about that.
I don't think they think about it. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah.
As long as it's a good sound way for the horse to do it,
right,
and accomplish it, it's like a road map. There's many different roads that'll lead to, well, Sedona, no, there's only a couple.
Yeah.
But would lead to like Phoenix, okay?
Yeah.
And it's just which one you choose, and they'll all work.
Right.
Okay. Well, Matthew, it's been fun. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And we enjoy you being here on Speaking of Horses.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us at the Sedona Equus Film Festival, Sedona, Arizona. We're glad you joined us right here on Speaking of Horses, and we look forward to seeing you back here for more great horse stories on Speaking of Horses. Well, that's our show. I'm your host, Wayne Williams. Speaking of Horses, we'll be back next week with a brand new show. Or join us at speakingofhorses.com.